of Uz, there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and he shunned evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys. And of course, he had a large number of servants to take care of all the animals in the family. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East. All right, so let's deal with some of the technical things that you're going to usually ask or as we begin a book study. In the first place, who wrote the book? Well, it probably wasn't Job, because Job was not present like in heaven and so forth. And it was probably written sometime after he lived. Could have been, some people feel it was written by Moses. Some people feel that it could have been written by Solomon, because again, it was considered poetic material. Job lived to be 200, so he probably would have lived in the time of the patriarchs of Abraham and Joseph and all of those folks. He was considered. This book was considered in the wisdom literature with Psalms and Proverbs. Job was a guy who was wealthy. How do we know he was wealthy? It doesn't say anything about the money he had, but as was common in writing of that period of time, your worth was determined by your livestock, your animals, the property that you had, the amount of property. Abraham was described often as having a lot of livestock and so forth. So, and he could have been he was the greatest man in the area, so he probably functioned as a governor or something like that. People would come to him for guidance, and he would give direction and make plans and so forth. The Bible tells us that, the text tells us that he was blameless. Now, does that mean that he was perfect? No, he wasn't perfect, but he was blameless. He was a man that he feared God. And even though his understanding of God would have been different than what later people would understand, different than how we understand God. He had kind of a rudimentary understanding of God at that time. But he was a man that feared and loved God. Notice, we'll see in just a moment that he feared him in such that he wanted to make sure that his kids didn't offend God, that they didn't sin against him, even kind of unknowingly sinned. So he was a man of great faith. He shunned evil. He was a moral man. He tried to do the right things all the time. And these last 3 especially are going to be very important to remember as we go through the book of Job. Remember that he was a good guy, because he's, the rest, some of the rest of the story. Look with me at we'll continue on from 4. His sons used to hold feasts in their homes on their birthdays, and they would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. When a period of feasting had run its course, Job would make arrangements for them to be purified. Early in the morning, he would sacrifice a burnt offering for each of them, thinking, "Perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." This was Job's regular custom. Now, I love that because do any of you pray for your children? Do our children always do what we think they should? Never quite sure. There are some things that we probably just don't want to know. And yet we pray for them. And in this case, not that the kids were bad, but just that they regularly got together and partied as a family, probably on birthdays and other holidays, just like all of us do. And just in case things got out of hand or one of the kids had some thoughts that were not real pure, Job would insist that they purify themselves the next morning. So notice, after the party, he had them get up the next morning and purify themselves. And then he would also burn sacrifices for them. So he was very concerned for his children. He had a great love for them. Look at verse 6. One day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. The Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." Verse 9, "Does Job fear God for nothing?" Satan replied, "Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to his face." The Lord said to Satan, "Well, okay. Then everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger." Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Now, this is kind of I've read this many, many times, but haven't really thought that much about it. What is this that's going on in heaven? Did you ever think about that? This isn't the only place that we see it in the Bible. I have verses up here from the book of 1 Kings. 1 Kings, chapter 22, beginning at verse 19. "And Micaiah said, 'Therefore hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne, and all the host of heaven standing beside him on his right hand and his left hand.'" So God's on the throne, and around him are all these angelic heavenly beings. All right? And the Lord said, "Who will entice Ahab that he may go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead?" And one said one thing, and another said another. So God says, who's going to do this job I have for you? And they're all giving their input. Did you ever think of this? They're all giving their input. And then a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord, saying, "I'll do it." One of these heavenly beings said, "I'll do it." And the Lord said to him, "Well, by what means?" And he said, "Well, I'll go out and will be a lying spirit in the mouth of his prophets." And he said, "You are to entice him, and he shall succeed. Go out and do so. Now, therefore, the Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouths of all your prophets. The Lord has declared disaster for you." So here in Job chapter 1, we have the first council meeting. And here you have God, and you have all of these angelic beings, and it's sort of like a staff meeting. Many of you that are in business or have been in business, you would gather the staff together maybe on a Monday morning, and you would say, "Okay, Cheryl, this is what I need you to do this week. Linda, can you tell me, what you have going this week? Here's a need that I have. Wally, I need someone to go to a nursing home and visit someone. Can you do that, or can you appoint Sue to do that, or can some of you go?" "Okay, yeah, I'll do it." "Okay, Alice, I need you to take the youth some places." "Okay, you're going to do that." So, we plan out the week, and then on Friday afternoon, we'll check in again and see how everything went, and make whatever revisions we need to. So this, in Job chapter 1, is kind of like a staff meeting. And notice who attends. One of the beings, one of the angelic beings by the name of Satan. Exactly. Now Satan chimes in, and before Satan chimed him, God looked over at him. I won't call you Satan, but I won't use any. But he said, "Okay, Satan, have you looked at my man Job? Boy, Job is just a great guy. He does everything right. He is the most righteous man. He fears God. He's blameless. What a great man." And so Satan says, "Okay, well, Job's only faithful because you've given him everything. No wonder your kids love you, because you give them everything." Did you hear that before? Yeah. And he said, "But what would happen if you would take that protective hedge away from him? What would happen if you took that away? Would he still serve you? Would he still be blameless? Would he still be faithful?" God kind of thought about it for a minute and said, "Well, all right, go ahead. Do whatever. Just don't hurt his body. Just don't do anything to his body." Well, so let's ask a couple questions. What do we learn about Satan? Well, the first thing we learn about him at that time, and the same as today. You think these councils still go on today? Why not? Yeah, I would think so. Satan has to give an account to God. He has to come to God, and before he does anything, he basically has to ask if he can do that. God does permit, and he restrains Satan. God permitted him to do this to Job, but he also restrained him and said, "You can only go so far." We also see that of course, Satan exists as he exists today, and he is in direct opposition to God. So, two powers that are at play in the world today. Of course, God is greater. Satan gets his power, gets his direction from God. So God is all powerful, but he certainly does exist. And of course, we'll see his name means accuser or instigator. And you see what he's doing here. He's accusing God of favoritism. He's also instigating. He's going to be instigating what's going to be happening shortly. So Job was tested, and if you were to go on and read from verse 13, you'll see that first one servant comes and says to Job, all of your oxen were destroyed, and all of the shepherds that worked with them, all the servants that worked with the oxen were destroyed. All of them were destroyed by various means. The sheep and all of their shepherds, all of their servants, destroyed. Your camels and all of those, the shepherd of the camels and so forth were killed. I was the only one that was able to make it. And then he hears that his children were killed. Not only were their children killed, but they were killed while they were having one of their parties. So one of these things that they enjoyed the most, and wind came or whatever, and brought the building down, destroyed them all. Wow. What would you do? What would you do if you got word like that? You probably can think back in your life when you got similar information. I mean, nothing to this magnitude, of course, but when you got word that a loved one had passed unexpectedly, or something else, your savings had been wiped out. You had invested with Bernie Madoff or something, and suddenly, everything is gone. Verse 20. At this, Job got up and tore his robe and shaved his head. Then he fell to the ground in worship and said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised." In all of this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. If you were Job, what do you think? What do you think you would have done? Any ideas? Be tough. Would be tough, certainly. Chapter 2. We have another divine council meeting. We have another staff meeting in heaven. And this is sometime after all of this has happened to Job, and Job responded in a wonderful way. Chapter 2, verse 1, on another day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan was also present himself before them. And the Lord said, "Well, Satan, where have you been?" And Satan said, "Well, I've been roaming, throughout the earth." Doesn't seem like he has a regular home. He's always roaming. And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered? Hey, you looked at Job? How's he doing? Huh? You took everything away from him, but what? He's still faithful. He still loves you. He's a blameless and upright man." And Satan said in verse 4, "Skin for skin." Satan replied, "A man will give all he has for his own life, but now stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to his face." Well, the Lord said to Satan, "Very well then, he's in your hands, but you must spare his life." Again, God grants Satan the permission, but there's restraint there. It says you can inflict his body, but don't take his life. So again, Job's claiming that he's only faithful because he has his health. And so then Satan goes and he strikes him with an illness. Now, we've heard a lot of things of what the illness. What kind of illness was it? Do you think? Some have said leprosy. Yeah, if you read through the book of Job, there are several times when he mentions some of the afflictions that he has, and so if you put all those together, it looks like these are the symptoms of his disease. He had inflamed eruptions. Now, I don't even want to guess what that is, but that doesn't sound good in a body. He has intolerable itching, disfigurement, maggots in his ulcers, terrifying dreams, running tears, fetid breath, emaciation, erosion of his bones, and the blackening and peeling of his skin. Verse 8, Job then took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself with it as he sat among the ashes. Now, probably the ashes were burnt dung. That's what they burned there. It's not like they had, they could go to 7-Eleven and get one of those things of wood, one of those little packets of wood. No, they probably burnt dung. And so that's what Job is sitting in with his body covered with sores. He's scraping himself with a broken piece of pottery. Okay, a time when certainly he needs some comfort. So his wife comes up, and in, I'm sure they were sweet, dulcet tones, she said, "Why don't you just curse God and die? Why don't you just curse God and die?" Now, the way the phrase is, it probably this was out of character for her, but she just looks at what has happened to him. So just give it up. just give it up. Why are you still faithful? He said, you're talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? Again, if you're an underliner, there's a verse that you might want to underline. Should we accept good from God but not trouble? In all this, Job did not sin in what he did. So he still is maintaining that faithfulness. Verse 11, and this will kind of set the pattern for the rest of the book of Job. When Job's three friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, who's like the shortest man in the Bible, Bildad the Shuhite. Ding. Come on, lighten up. And Zophar the Naamathite heard about all the troubles that had come upon him. They set out from their homes and met together by agreement to sympathize with him and comfort him. When they saw him at a distance, they could hardly recognize him. They began to weep aloud, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to him because they saw how great his suffering was. So it's interesting, and I know that probably all of you have had this experience. If you've gone to a hospital or whatever, and you know that a loved one or someone is in bad shape. You've heard that, but when you walk in the door and you see them for the first time, what's the emotion? You're just beside you're weeping, and the same thing happened here. They'd heard that. First of all, they met together, so they're going to go together. Often a good idea. And then when they saw him, they just realized that what they had heard, the words couldn't even describe his condition, and so they wept. And then they sat silently for 7 days and 7 nights. Why would they do that? Well, because that was the period of mourning for someone who had died. So basically, they just assumed that Job was terminal, that Job was on his way out. And so they all just sat there sort of waiting for him to die. So that's how we end chapter 2. Some questions, questions that come to mind. I mean, here was Job. He's a great guy. He had everything. Life was good, and then all hell hits. As his whole life goes to pot. And I can safely assume that though many of you, all of you, have endured trials of some type, probably none of them were as great, as what Job had experienced. Everything he had, except his wife, was gone. He figures as well that his life probably is about to end. Because remember, Job wasn't aware of what was going on in heaven. God didn't clue him in of what was going on. He just figured that things were bad and that his life was about to end. In your lowest moment, do a little, reflection, I guess. And in your lowest moment, what did you think was going on? What did you think as you sat there and tried to process the information? Did you think, boy, bad luck? Yeah, bad luck. Sometimes we think, well, it's a result of past behaviors. Now, my mother-in-law passed, month or so ago, and she always there was never any question. She had lung cancer, but she had been a smoker like all of her life until the last probably year or 2 years. I mean, she'd been a pretty heavy smoker, and so she said, I know this is happening to me because it wasn't like an woe is me. Why did this have to happen to me? But it was a result of behavior, punishment from God. And I know that many of you, because I've heard you say before, why is God doing this to me? What have I done that's so bad that God is causing me to go through this now? Also, sometimes we have the thought, and we hear this sometimes, that God really had nothing to do with this. Have you heard that? That when you go through bad times, that's not God. When you go through good times, when you're blessed, that's God's blessings. God's right there, and He's helping you. However, when you experience bad things in your life, well, that can't be God, because God loves you. God's not going to do anything bad to you. Heard that? All right. Now, really? I mean, can you get your head around that? Do you really believe that God sometimes takes a break? That maybe, the God is going to just turn and will let all this stuff happen. God doesn't know about it. And then He comes back from His break and see, oh man, you're going through some tough times. I'm sorry. Here, let me shower some blessings on you. Tough question. If you looked at those 4 possibilities, how did that work for you? Did that bring you through the difficulty? Were you then able to have peace with God and peace with others? Or did you still struggle with it? Two things I want you to think about this week, okay? These are free, so no charge for either of these. The first thing to keep in mind, we talk about things very often, and we talk about our beliefs. We talk about things that are a part of our faith, and we believe with all our hearts. But how often does that doctrine, the systematic theology or whatever doctrine we're studying, how often does that intersect with our life? How does the doctrine enter our life when we go through things? We say we believe that God is sovereign. Well, what does it mean that He's only sovereign when He's paying attention? Does it mean that He's only sovereign when He's not on break? Or does it mean that God is in control, regardless of how we might be feeling or thinking? All right, that's the first thing I want you to ponder this week. Again, call me, email me, whatever, if you want to look at this. Second thing, one of the phrases that's used so often, again, and I know that some of you have probably used this before, but why do bad things happen to good people? You heard that? All right, let me suggest to you one thing for you to think about. There's only been one good person that bad things happen to. So if you are referring to yourself, awfully presumptuous. All right? There's only been one good person. And thank God that person suffered so that we won't face punishment for the lack of goodness in our lives.